This is my late father's Minolta X-300, and you might have seen my emotional journey with this camera. This is my Sony Alpha 7 R5, and these two have a lot more in common than you might think. Stay tuned. So as I mentioned, this was my father's X300, and I did two videos about putting film through this for the first time and taking it on an emotional journey to the place he probably loved most in the world. I'll link those two videos in the description below. Today, I want to do two things. First of all, I want to talk about how this camera's DNA is in my Sony Alpha 7 R5, and quite a lot of it. And secondly, I want to take some pictures with this Minolta MD 35-70 lens on the Sony Alpha 7 R5 and compare it to a contemporary lens, the 24-105 f4. They're cinemafocal lengths, basically standard zooms. So it's going to be interesting to try out this ancient 40-50-year-old lens on a 61 megapixel state-of-the-art camera. But before we do that, let's just talk about Minolta and Sony. If you don't know Minolta, they weren't the biggest company in the world. You had your Nikons, you had your Canons, then maybe you had Pentaxes and your medium format cameras such as Mamiya and Bronica. Minolta sort of had a middle ground, but where they were always ahead was with technology. They were absolute innovators of modern photography, particularly in the 1970s, 80s and through to the 1990s. Now this camera is pretty basic. It's aperture priority and manual, but aperture priority was one of the things that Minolta introduced to the world. It also introduced integral motor drives and integral autofocus within the camera rather than within the lens. In fact, the IBIS in the Alpha 7 R5 is a direct descendant also of the Minolta system. Minolta were bought by Sony not because Sony just wanted to take them out the market, but because they had so many technological advantages, so much technology and patents that they wanted to use that in their forthcoming series of cameras. It kind of gave them very much a head start, particularly in the emerging mirrorless era, where the technology would really come into use. It was actually 2006 when Sony bought Minolta, and it was a merger of minds really. In fact, the first Sony Alpha 100 was effectively a rebadged Minolta. Even the DNA of the Sony Alpha mount is in the modern E-mount cameras. It's a direct descendant back to the Minolta era and the Minolta mounts of the 1990s. So that's a tiny bit of the history of Minolta and Sony. I've written a bit more of a comprehensive article about that on light stalking, and I will also put the link for that down in the description below. For now, let's see what we can shoot. We're here at the beautiful St Mary's Lighthouse. It's freezing cold. The light is absolutely gorgeous. And I'm going to put this lens on the Sony Alpha 7 R5, take some pictures with it, take some video with it, and I'm also going to put the 24-70 back on and we'll take some video and photos of that. Now the mount adapter that I have for this lens won't allow me to use any auto modes, so we will shoot entirely in manual. We will stop the camera down manually and we'll just see what sort of image quality we can get from this lens on the Sony Alpha 7 R5. So let's get into it. So that's the lens on the camera. It went on very, very easily. As I say, there's no aperture control on this, so it's all have to be done manually. So I've got the camera set manually. We're going to take a few shots, probably at 35mm and at 70mm, manually focusing, of course. I will use focus peaking to make sure I get the very best focus on this lens, and we'll see what we can get. So let's line up a shot at 35mm. So we're getting a 30th of a second. I think it's around f8, something like that. We'll take a few shots at 35mm. And the manual aperture ring is working absolutely fine, so yes, it is at f8. We'll keep it at f8 to avoid any diffraction and stuff like that on the lens. So we'll shoot everything at f8 and just match our shutter speed to get the best image quality. Focus peaking is working really well and useful because when shooting on the old camera, the Minolta X-300, it's really dark viewfinder. So having focus peaking on here and a bright screen really helps the actual focusing. We'll take it out to 50mm and see what we can get. And we'll take it out to 70mm and do the same there, and then we'll put the Sony lens back on and see if we can match what we've been doing with this lens. Interestingly, the continuous bracket mode seems to work. I will just have to check when I get back to see if it's changing the shutter speed rather than the aperture. I suspect it is. If so, that's actually rather handy. And yes, just sort of chimping on it, it actually confirms that it is changing the shutter speed. The aperture remains fixed, obviously, because it's manually controlled, but the shutter speed is changing automatically with the continuous mode. And I don't know, we'll wait till we get them back into Lightroom or Photolab to have a look at them, but looking through the viewfinder, there's a beautiful sort of softness to this lens, a real sort of nice aesthetic it's got to it. I'm really looking forward to getting these back into Photolab 9 and having a look at them just to see just how they compare to that digital sharpness of the Sony 24-105. Be interesting in video as well. I think that's probably it for this morning, so I'm going to head back, get a cup of coffee, go home and start loading all this stuff up onto DxO Photolab, and then we'll have a quick look through them in the studio, and we'll have a little look at our conclusions to see how this little lens from a 50-year-old camera works out on this modern Sony body, and how the DNA of these two systems are so closely linked. I'll see you back in the studio. So welcome back to the studio. And just how well did this 50-odd-year-old lens fare on a modern camera? I think you'll be surprised. This is the Minolta MD 35-70mm. It's nothing more than a kit lens. The modern day equivalent of which we have, you know, the 24-70mm 5.6. It's relatively slow, it's relatively limited. It was a cheap lens to go with the camera. I've uploaded the images into Lightroom. I'm going to use Lightroom for this particular comparison because I haven't really looked at the Photolab comparison tools yet, so I'm just going to stick with the familiar for the moment. We'll look at those in Lightroom. I've also put the video into Final Cut Pro, a side-by-side comparison of the Sony and Minolta in video as well, so we can have a look at that. So here we have the images in Lightroom, and as you can see here, I've color coded them. The ones in green are the Minolta and the ones in red are from the Sony 24-105. And just for fun, I've actually edited one of the Minolta images, and we'll have a look at that last. So what we will do is we will take the first shot, which is on the Minolta, taken at 35mm, and we'll open it alongside the Sony lens, taken at 35mm, and we'll put them up side by side like this. And as you can see, the green label here is for the Minolta and the red label down here is for the Sony. And you can see at normal size, they look broadly similar. So if we bring them in to 100%, and you can see again, they're very similar. There's not a huge difference in it. There's a slightly softened look to the Minolta lens here on the left, and that slightly sort of digital look to the Sony lens on the right. But broadly, they're very similar. You can see the slight softness again in the chimney pots on the house here as well. It's a significantly sharper on the Sony, but that's a very usable image and a very nice look. And I'm going to take them up to 200% as well, so let's do that. And at 200% again, you're just about seeing the sort of limitations of the Minolta lens. Let's not forget, this is at 35mm on the Minolta, which is its widest focal length. length, whereas on the Sony we're at 35mm, and that's probably about 1/3 of the way into its focal length, so there is a significant difference there. But the Minolta's a very, very usable image. So let's compare them at 50mm. Now again, the Minolta's on the left, the Sony's on the right, and again they look broadly similar in terms of exposure and sort of actual look. Let's zoom into 100% on the Minolta, and we'll do the same on the Sony. And you can see, if I bring that there, they look very, very similar. There's still a very touch of softness to the Minolta, a nice softness, but at 50mm, which is probably the optimum focal length on the Minolta lens, it is pretty much on par with the Sony 24-105 in terms of look. It's a little bit warmer in terms of colour. You can just see that in the sky. But I'm really quite blown away with just how sharp this little lens is. I'm not going to go into edge sharpness and all that sort of stuff because we don't really have edges on this particular scene anyway that would actually give us a good idea. But let's just go to 200%. And yeah, they are very, very similar. It's actually quite remarkable. I mean, you could probably buy one of these little Minolta lenses for £30 or £40, whereas the Sony is £600-700. You can see in the shadow areas in the chimney pots up on the Sony here, there is definitely some more sharpness, but don't forget, we're looking at this at 200%. And here we are at 70mm. Again, on the left we have the Minolta and on the right we have the Sony. There's quite a bit of a colour shift here. In fact, I would say the Sony's gone a bit warmer and the Minolta's actually gone a little bit colder at 70mm. Interesting. There might have just been the lights changed very slightly. We'll sort of discount that. Anyway, let's go into 100%, and that's 100% on the Minolta, and let's go into 100% on the Sony. And that's absolutely outstanding. The Minolta is just really, really sharp. I'm actually blown away by that, to the point where I'm actually checking that I haven't accidentally selected the Sony lens, but I haven't. This is definitely showing up in the metadata here as no focal length, no lens details. So this is absolutely the Minolta lens. That really is quite outstanding. Look at the sharpness. I mean, if anything, is it sharper than the Sony? It's quite possibly at 70mm, slightly sharper than the Sony. That really, really has blown me away. That's a very, very impressive little lens, and it's kind of inspired me to go out and take more images with this little lens. Let's just have a quick look at them at 200%. That's the Minolta at 200%, and that's the Sony at 200%. And in terms of, I would say there's actually more contrast in the Minolta than there is in the Sony. Looking at the brickwork here, there's more definition in it. Possibly slightly more definition in the Sony in the side of the house here. But overall, absolutely outstanding. I mean, you would certainly be able to print large prints from this Minolta lens. I am honestly quite blown away by that. Anyway, let's just return to the full screen at the moment, and we're going to pick the one that I've just edited. And that's the shot I've edited from the Minolta, I think at 50mm, perhaps 35mm. And as you can see, it's edited into a really lovely image. Zoomed in a little bit, you can see there's plenty of detail, plenty of contrast, plenty of sharpness in it. That's a really, really nice image, and that's a lens worthy of any camera, even though it's just a simple kit lens. So let's quickly have a look at some video. I've just overlaid the video here in Final Cut Pro. It's not a particularly scientific test. It's shot in S-Log3. I haven't added any LUTs to it. On the left we have the Minolta, on the right we have the Sony. They're slightly different focal lengths. I'll just play them. They're looped around for the moment. And you can see they are very, very similar in look. The Sony's a little bit cooler, a little bit more digital, if you like. If I just zoom into 100% on the screen here, you can see the sharpness is absolutely there in that Minolta lens. It's certainly a very usable lens. It's just as good in this experiment as the Sony is, and certainly very, very usable. Let's just go full screen for a little bit and have a look at them side by side. The Sony just looks a little bit more clinical, but the Minolta, it's got a really lovely look. It's certainly very, very useful, and I think I will use this. So I've got to be honest with you, I'm actually really impressed with this little lens. Yes, it's not as sharp and digital looking as the Sony, of course it's not, but it's got that nice film aesthetic to it, that sort of softness around the edges that really gives the images a real nice look to them. It's not quite sharp at 35mm, but that's its widest focal length. As you zoom in a little bit, it does become a little bit better. It also looks good in video. And combining sort of modern technology, the focusing tools, the exposure tools with this old lens works really well. I found myself quite naturally using this lens. The aperture closed down very easily using the adapter. The shutter speed obviously set through the camera, ISO set through the camera. Things like focus peaking and histograms really help you nail the exposure as best you can. So working with a 50-year-old lens is really not a major issue. Now, as I said, I did a couple of videos using this camera and this lens, shooting film for the first time in 2 or 3 decades. And I'll leave a link to those in the description below. They were probably the most emotional films I've ever done. And I'm really proud of them. So if you want to see those, I'll leave the link. So will I use this lens again on the Sony Alpha 7R5? Absolutely. In fact, I've got a couple of videos going through my head at the moment where I'm going to go out and just shoot this day-to-day shooting in a city, perhaps Durham, perhaps Newcastle, and actually use this lens. Because not only is it a 50-year-old film camera lens, it allows you to get back into the art of focusing manually, making sure you set your aperture. There's going to be a real challenge to getting some real nice shots out of this lens. So have you used old vintage lenses on your cameras for photos or for video? Let me know in the comments below. Let me know what you think of this particular lens. Were you surprised by how good it was? Again, let me know in the comments. And if you've enjoyed the video, a like would be fantastic. A subscription would be even better. And I really look forward to seeing you in the next one.